IB Nation Sports Talk up and rolling. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you with us here on a Tuesday. He's Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. It's We In, We Out Day. And of course, that means all the questions are submitted on the new Champions Lounge. Premium subscribers to irishbreakdown.com. Head over there right now. Go to irishbreakdown.com. Click on the Champions Lounge tab at the top of the page. Get in there and find all that good intel and juicy bits of information and all that different kind of stuff. Jesse, we're not going to waste any time today. We're pretty much just going to jump right into it because you're on a little bit of a time crunch today. And so, Salty, I saw him post a message here in the chat saying, make sure to get to the questions that are posted within the last 3 minutes or so. We're going to go for an hour today, Jesse and I. Whatever questions we don't get to, I promise we will get in the mailbag show tomorrow. Because, again, Jesse's on a little bit of a time crunch. So we got to stay on schedule as much as possible. You feel that?
Oh, I feel that.
All right. So here we go. We're not going to waste any time. Coming in hot, by the way. I do agree with what old Sly Fox is saying. 18 more days. Going to explode because he's so pumped. Definitely in on this season. All right, Sly Fox. All right, stay calm. Stay calm, stay cool. So here's what Joe has to say. Being ranked 7th in the AP preseason poll is a really good spot for Notre Dame to start the season because it leaves them a little wiggle room for a loss, but also sets them up for a good spot to get into the playoffs. We in or we out on that?
Yeah, I think I'm in on that ultimately because it does give them that ultimate kind of wiggle room. You take one loss, you're probably going to stay, in the top 10, be in that kind of, 7, 8, 9, 10 range. And then if you go undefeated or, maybe even 2 losses keeps them in the top 10 or, with how these conferences are laid out this season. If you have 1 loss and ultimately even maybe no losses, then yeah, you're going to stay kind of hovering around that 4, 5, 6 area. So I think ultimately I can buy this logic.
I'm in on it as well. I think anytime you can start off in the top 10, it does just what Joe is talking about here. It gives you some wiggle room, even with the loss. Maybe you fall out of the top 10, but then you win some games. You continue to win. Obviously, the wiggle room sort of disappears in terms of, you don't want to obviously take on other losses later in the season or whatever. I mean, or even if it happens later in the season, you're gonna rise, you're gonna fall a little bit. So I think it's a great place to be. 7 is, it's obviously not right smack dab in the middle of the top 10, but in terms of like when you go 1 to 12, since 12 is the magic number this season, it's a great spot to start in. And I think that I don't think that 7 will be their max out spot this year either. Interesting one here from Tyler. Al Golden will leave next year and Mike Mickens will get promoted to defensive coordinator. You in or you out on that?
I'm going to say we out. I think Al Golden has found a role that he enjoys, something that he is very good at, and I think he'll continue to lead this Notre Dame defense for years to come as in being, one of the top defenses in the country.
He's definitely going to garner some interest, I think, if, assuming this defense is everything that we think that it's going to be this year. He's going to get interest because they were really good last year, and he has shown by coming back to college, by coming to Notre Dame, that he can coach an elite defense, and he can coach, in his own words, an elite NFL type defense. Like, this is an NFL defense. So the better he does, the more interest I think he's going to continue to have from the NFL. But I just feel like barring winning a national championship this season, and I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibility, but I mean, it's obviously a very high bar. Barring that, I think that Al Golden, because that gets you probably the most interest that you're ever going to get. Like, everyone's going to come after everyone on your staff at that point. But I think Al Golden's sticking around. for a few years. I think he really likes the spot that he's in right now. So I'm going to have to be out on it as well. But I do think it's going to be something that we're going to be keeping our eye on.
People are going to be stressing over it.
Yeah. And stressing over Mike Mickens as well, because that's part of it. Not only are you concerned that you would lose Al Golden, you would at least feel good if a guy like Mike Mickens were to be promoted to defensive coordinator, because everyone loves the job that he's doing on the recruiting trail and developing those guys as well once they get here. And as Marcus Freeman said last year, he's a guy who's ready to become a coordinator soon. So, like if you did lose a guy like Al Golden, you could at least feel good potentially that you're moving a guy like Mike Mickens up and into that spot. Okay, this one from JG Whitetown. The 2025 recruiting class will have a bigger impact than the 2024 class. National champion opportunities / draft picks. Now, neither one of us is, a recruiting expert, so you can answer this to whatever extent you feel comfortable.
The avenue I'm going to go on is, to me, it boils down to Deuce Knight. And I think if Deuce Knight stays and, honors his commitment to Notre Dame, then I think I would be in on this. But if Deuce Knight leaves, I think that is a significant impact for a recruiting class that I'm not going to say is struggling or we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. The blue chip ratio is down right now, as is compared to other classes by Marcus Freeman. It's not as, highly ranked nationally. And again, there's time for that to change. I get all that. But Deuce Knight is a big part of that. And I think he is a program changing quarterback ultimately, especially if he can, fall into the Mike Denbrock offense and play how Jaden Daniels played. Like, that's a game changer. That's a guy who is potentially a Heisman finalist, a guy who is, going to potentially carry your team to the playoffs, to a national championship, etc. So to me, that's what it rides on.
Yeah, I think that if they're able to keep Deuce Knight, which in recent days, that has looked better, than the 2024 class continues to have, some big time impact. The 2025 class does still include Noah Grubbs, so you have that, and they're off to a pretty solid start all the way around with 2025. So I'm going to go hesitantly in just because of the direction the signs are pointing in right now, but ever so hesitantly, I guess. And again, not a recruiting expert, so we leave that to the experts. This one is from Corky0789. We in, we out. James Rendell balls out, and Texas A&M's average starting field position will be behind the 15-yard line. In or out on that?
So this is if you think the offense is going to be, punting a lot ultimately, right? Because, a lot of punts come from the offense not doing much. So
true.
But I guess you could, Notre Dame's not going to score on every drive, so you can look at it as, the opportunities that they don't score. How are they putting Texas A&M down the field? I'm going to say out. I think the 15 is a little tough. I think if you went inside the 20, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable with that. But we all know James Rendell is the guy who is going to win me our, draft that we did a few weeks ago. So I am more in on James Rendell than most.
I'm going to go out because I agree with you. I'm thinking 20-25 yard line. That is reasonable because it's going to be more than just his punting. Like, how much is the offense at least? Even because, there's different degrees of some kind of success when it comes to moving the ball offensively. Like, even if you don't attempt a field goal, score a touchdown, whatever, even if you're able to say, drive out of, from your own 10 close to midfield, and then you end up punting, that's still good movement. Now in that case, I would be fairly confident that he would be dropping them inside the 15, just based on what we saw him doing in the practice earlier. But I've got to be out because 15 just seems a little greedy. I think 20 to 25 yard line, somewhere more in that range. Look, everyone's high on Connor Weigman, by the way. A lot of people high on Connor Weigman in Texas A&M. Are we overlooking the A&M offense? I don't know. There's still a lot of questions, I think, down there between their offensive line. You can be high on a guy in practice, but based on his game history, I haven't seen an elite quarterback so far. You've got a new offense, new offensive coordinator, all these things. So I don't know, but a lot of people are really high on Texas A&M quarterback Connor Weigman. I guess we'll find out. Kaz Fan 31. The Texas Heat will be a significant factor in the first game of the season. In or out on that?
I'm going to say we out. At some point, you get used to it. The only thing that is maybe detrimental is if you start running into, cramping issues. But I have, that's what they have the training staff and, the nutrition staff for. They're going to make sure these players are well hydrated, well rested, have all the appropriate things in their body going into, an environment like that. To me, the heat stuff is all mental. After some point, everyone's playing in the same heat. You start sweating. There'll be, cool rags, water, maybe fans on the sideline. Like they'll be fine. It's just a matter of, kind of controlling the uncontrollable at times. Are you going to be able to prevent, the cramping, the dehydration, stuff like that?
I think everyone's really worked up about this more than you need to. Like, remember, Tallahassee, Florida is a pretty sticky place to go as well. And Notre Dame opened up there, 3 years ago, 2021. And I think that this year's team across the board is better than that year's team. And they ended up, was it a close game? Yeah, but they ended up winning that game. My point is there's heat and humidity in a lot of different places in August and September across the country, including South Bend, Indiana. Now, is it going to be as hot and sticky in South Bend as College Station, Texas? The odds are probably not. But, they've always got a good plan. They've showed in the past they've got they had a plan for how they went about attacking their sleep and nutrition and all this different stuff when they went to Ireland last year. New set of circumstances, new set of variables this year. Now it's going to be hot. I've seen people saying they need to spend the week in Texas to practice in the heat down there. You're not going to go camp in Texas for a week when classes have already started just because it's going to be a little bit hot. Guys have played in heat before. A lot of the guys on this roster are from the South, whether it's Florida or Texas or Georgia, wherever it happens to be. They've played in heat before. So it's really a matter of how they started up, probably Sunday or Monday that week, with the hydration and the nutrition. That's what it's going to come down to. And you take plenty of bags of, saline, all that, IV fluids and all that kind of stuff as well. I think they'll be fine. So I'm out on that. And I also like Notre Dame's depth. I think that works for Notre Dame as well. DK says, no, you don't get it. 90% humidity is worse in Texas than the rest of the world. I mean, I've been to Texas
at some
before.
point. Hot is hot.
I know it's hot, again, pump it with fluids. I think
it's weird to say, but when you're in all of those pads, like when you get to a point, you just don't feel the heat anymore. You're just hot. You know what I mean? Like it's you're not really getting any more hot. You're already hot. So it's like, again, like they're just going to be hot. Everyone's going to be hot and sweaty, but it's not going to be anything, I don't think, out of the ordinary.
They're going to be making sure these guys are hydrated all week because, like Anthony is saying, consume the fluid the night before influences the next day. And these guys all week long are going to be, they're going to make sure that these guys are drinking even more fluids than they've had before.
When I was in college, I remember we had, this is during camp, and we were expecting a pretty hot heat wave. And we actually had to, make sure that we were how do I say, just testing RP essentially. Like we had to make sure it was a certain color in order to practice because of dehydration.
That's fun. All right, Michigan can suck it, says we in, we out. Notre Dame will finish the season, postseason included, ranked higher than their AP poll number 7 ranking. In or out on that?
So what that boils down to is if you're in a 12-team playoff, after the first round, you have the 4 teams with a bye. So then you're down to 8 teams again. And so you'd have to basically, if you wanted to guarantee yourself to be a top 7 team, you have to at least make it to the second round and then, make it to that Final Four, essentially. So win 2 playoff games. I think the question is, do we think Notre Dame is going to, 1, make the playoffs, and do we think they're going to win a playoff game to kind of be above that ranking? I'm going to say we in on now because I do think they're going to make the playoffs. And I do think they will get a good matchup in the first round, and they'll win that game as well. But when it gets down to 8 teams, I think that's where it gets a little bit more dicey. But, I mean, at that point, you can't tell me that Notre Dame's not going to be within 7 of 8. So I'll say I'm in on this one.
I'm in on it as well because I do think they'll get to the playoff, and I do think that they will win that first-round playoff game, which puts them, as you said, in that final 8 then at that point. And then it's just a matter of, okay, if you win that next game and you get to the Final Four, you're definitely going to be there. But I think that they will at least be in that final 8. So that doesn't guarantee they're going to be ranked higher than their number 7 ranking, but I feel pretty confident. Again, I think between the quarterback and the defense, very confident in the overall what we should see from this team this season. So I'm going to be in on it as well. By the way, thank you very much, Anthony, for the super chat, throwing it in there. Appreciate you throwing that in there and being here on the show tonight. A lot of good questions so far for We In and We Out from the new Champions Lounge. Eric Irish 24. Jack Kaiser, Drake Bowen, and Jalen Sneed will combine for 175 tackles this season. We in or we out on that?
Oh, man. That's 60 tackles apiece. And, Kaiser and Bowen are going to be, well, there's no 1s or 2s, but they're going to be, I imagine Kaiser will be your mainstay, and Bowen is going to play the position that's naturally going to rack up the most, tackles. And I think he's going to be more of a run stop linebacker than KVA, because we know KVA is also going to see the field in some capacity as well. And, to me, I think the X factor in this question is Sneed. Can he have the season that I think everyone is kind of anticipating? And will he have enough to be, at around, 50 to 60 tackles? This is really tough because, I think that Kaiser will be maybe up in that 80 range. I think that's kind of where Bowen might be in that 60 to 80 range as well. So that's already, most of the legwork. So, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to say we in. It's just, it's a really good number. It's just, it's hard. And again, it all comes down to me, what you get out of Sneed.
You talked yourself into it. Anthony says he's in. Stymie brings up the great question. Does that include playoffs? Because, just like the NFL adding games to their regular season, all these records start changing and the numbers start changing, obviously, as you begin adding more games. And we are used to a 13-game season for Notre Dame when it comes to the stats. And basically, in 12-plus games last season, J.D. Bertrand, Jack Kaiser, and Maris Leofau, the top 3 leading linebackers in terms of tackles, combined for 182 tackles last season. So I'm going to base this on 13 games because that's what we have to compare it to. Like anything that goes, essentially beyond that bowl game, beyond that first playoff game will be included in the stats, but we haven't got there at that point. So I'm just going to base this on a 13-game season, and I'm going to say I'm out because we're going to, we talked extensively about the linebacker rotation yesterday, and we're going to touch on it a little bit in rapid fire later today as well. You're going to have 5 guys for 3 linebacker spots. And it feels like just what we know of Jalen Sneed so far, it feels like he's going to be more like in like maybe third down situations, pass rush situations, some of those kind of things. So I don't know what his bulk tackle total looks like. Like if you threw Kingston Viliamu Asa into this instead of Sneed, I would probably be in. But I don't know that Sneed is going to be a bulk tackle kind of guy. So I'm going to be out on this. I think he's still going to play a very vital role and a crucial role for Notre Dame, but I don't know that bulk tackles is going to be where it's at for him this season because of that 5-man rotation. So I'm going out. Jesse's going in, though. We in, we out. Howard Cross and Riley Mills will combine for 6+ sacks this season.
In. And I'll even say Cross does this himself.
Ooh. Breaking news here. Jesse going big time on this.
Cross, he's going to have a massive season.
I'm big time in on this. Again, the only thing that could really inhibit this is the fact that the defensive line rotation and who gets the snaps in some obvious third down situations and things like that. But I'm going to go in on this. I think that Cross and Mills will definitely combine for 6. I was going to say between the two, Mills could be the guy who pushes for 6 himself. So you're saying Cross could get 6 himself. I'm saying Mills could get 6 by himself.
I like that for us.
All right. We're split on that. Tommy says that he threw a question at the back end there today. I saw he had some good questions that he already had in there earlier. Ballpeen Shillelagh. In the opener, the storyline of Riley Leonard playing for Coach Elko at Duke will be brought up 10+ times. We in or we out on that?
I'll say out. 10 is a lot, but it'll definitely be talked about. It'll get to the point of probably nauseum at some point.
You're going to need to keep track of this in the first game. I'm going to go in, though, because I easily can see him saying, a lot of like, well, when Riley, like, does it count? Like, do they have to play? Does the Riley Leonard play? Like, do Leonard and Elko both have to come up, I guess, in the sentence for it to count? Or is it enough just when they mention that Riley Leonard played at Duke, those kind of things?
Well, I think you can count it because, Mike Elko ran that program. So it's just like an extension, right? Like if you say Duke, like I think that you can, basically everyone knows what you're talking about at that point. You're not talking about it if Mike Elko isn't the coach of Texas A&M.
Right. I'm going to go in. I think we're going to hear a lot of it. It's a perfect storyline, especially if you include, because I'm making sure that I'm reading this right, especially if you include the pregame show. I think it'll go well over 10 on the night. So I'm going to go in on it. JML 2223. Notre Dame currently has 2+ linebackers that will go in the second round or sooner when they enter the NFL draft. In or out on that?
I'm going to say out. I don't think it's for a lack of talent reason. I just think that the draft, and especially maybe average draft position for linebacker, I just don't think that that's you can get good linebackers in the second, third, fourth round. It's not, those aren't the guys burning up the first round board essentially. So I'm just going to have to say we out on that.
Yeah. And look at what happened to a guy like, Jeremiah Wusu Koromoa, like slipping and, all those different things, and the position that he plays, the size that he is, all these different things outweighed the kind of skill set that he had. And, the bottom line is, especially when you look at the particular kind of linebackers they have, these are inside linebacker type guys. They're not edge type, those kind of linebackers. So I'm going to have to be out on this. I could see one, like you could talk me into Kingston Viliamu Asa for sure, but I've got to be out on another one that's currently on the roster right now. It's a good question though. That doesn't, but again, that doesn't mean that these aren't going to be really productive, really good linebackers, just because they're not going in the second round. I think it has more to do with the position they play and the things that they'll be asked to do more than anything. Ghosted machine. We in or we out. In an expanded playoff era where players are monetizing NIL, should Notre Dame put names on jerseys again? I'm all for certain traditions, but this one is an incredibly inconsistent tradition, one that doesn't make sense to me in the current environment. So are you in or out on that, Jess? What do you think about names on the back of the jerseys full time?
Yeah, I would say in. I think if now it's to the point where these players are making money off of their name, and to me it's always nice as a fan to be like, yeah, it's like, I know who number 11 is, but sometimes at quick glance you're like, it'd just be nice to see the last name on the jersey. You know what I mean? So it's just like, I think as a fan it makes it a little bit easier, and more importantly, I think when you're talking about these players fully capitalizing on their name and image and likeness, I think it makes sense to have names on names on the back of the jerseys.
I think it makes absolute sense as well, because the first part of this, because of the NIL, like why wouldn't you? And I get you play for the name on the front of the jersey, not the back. Well, other sports at Notre Dame have names on the back of the jerseys. Like, is it any less important to them to play for Notre Dame than themselves or whatever, just because they have their names on the back? And like Spark says, definitely for the playoffs, which is essentially what they're doing now. And that's the thing, like they've gone to this thing where they started doing it a few years back. It's some kind of reward for the season. You get your names on the jerseys. But when you're talking about the EA Sports college football game, where these other teams do have names on the back of the jerseys, I believe from what I've seen, the names are on the back in the video game. And I think that it only makes sense to be doing this because players are able to make money on their names now. So yeah, this was exactly what I was about to say, Anthony. Either put them on there all the time or just leave them off completely. I think that that's what it comes down to. And because NIL is a thing, I don't think there's any reason not to have them on the back of the jerseys anymore. Eric Irish 24. Notre Dame running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers will combine for more than 250 receptions this year. By comparison, Notre Dame, those basically, because quarterbacks didn't catch any of their own passes last year. Those three position groups, 227 total receptions this year. So will it bump up by 23 to 250 or more this year? In or out on that?
That's a big end for me.
Big in for me as well. We're going to see a lot more from this passing game than we've seen in a long time at Notre Dame. So I've got to be in on that. I think there's going to be a lot of footballs being spread around the field, and we're all going to be very giddy about it. Also from Eric Irish 24. At the end of the season, more than 12 Notre Dame players will have accounted for at least one rush attempt. In or out on that?
Does that include, I'm going to say in. I'm looking at last season. And it looks like there's around like 15 or so. I don't know how much I count. I guess I don't know how much I count for backups. But then again, backups are a reward because you've done what you need to as a starting unit. So it's hard to say, excluding those guys. I would like to answer this question of, are they going to have designed runs for 12 different players?
Okay.
And I think that answer is going to be no, but I think they will find a way to surpass 12 at some point. Because I think you're going to have at least 3 to 4 wide receivers. You're going to have running backs. You're going to have Riley Leonard. Chris Mitchell is going to find a way to get, a jet sweep or I think Faison as well.
Let's just go through it here.
Greathouse.
So let's start with that. Riley Leonard for one.
Yep.
Steve Angeli is going to have a rush attempt at some point because he's going to be on the field in some blowout situations. So there's 2. Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Keydron Young, Aeneas Williams. Pretty confident all 4 of the running backs are going to get him. Devin Ford. So now we're up to 7. If you throw Devin Ford in there. Jordan Faison seems like a pretty good candidate.
Chris Mitchell. Greathouse.
Harrison. That gets you to 11 right there.
And I think you might have like one jumbo package with a tight end as well. So that gives you 12.
Last year, Jaden Thomas, Jaden Greathouse, Mitchell Evans, Chris Tyree, of course, was a wide receiver last year. They all had runs last season. So I'm going to go in. I'm in on this. I think.
Why not?
I think they'll top that number because, like you're adding the what you're basically trying to say like 12 and non-blowout situations. Is that kind of, the way you're phrasing it? I think you're going to definitely see 12 plus overall because you're going to see some backups. There's going to be time, like Skip Velada had a rushing attempt last year. So I'm in on this. As we continue with some of our we in, we out on this Thursday, a lot of great questions today and a big stream of questions that we got on the new Champions Lounge today for we in or we out. CJ Carr will remain QB4 for the entire 2024 season and play no meaningful snaps. We in or we out? This is the magic question, Jess, that so many people want to know.
I'm going to say we out. I think that there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of anticipation. And I think that Carr will continue to kind of exceed expectations, and he will be rewarded at some point this season. I think he will take some snaps. Meaningful is like, okay, yeah, he's not going to be the starting quarterback. He will. Is meaningful snaps still considered, mop-up duty at some point? I don't know.
Like, do you consider what Steve Angeli did, essentially getting to play the entire second half in blowout games last year? I consider that still somewhat meaningful.
You're still developing.
Because you're not waiting because you let him run the entire offense. So I consider those meaningful snaps. You didn't wait until the fourth quarter when there's 8 minutes left to get him on the field. You brought him out there. You let him play the entire second half a couple of different times. So I consider that meaningful. Like Stymie says, meaningful is his hang up. And that's where I think, and I'm still, I just based on things that we heard Gino Gaduli say the other day, and we played some of the stuff yesterday, I'm just not convinced that they're like, I do think CJ Carr is the quarterback of the future here at Notre Dame. And by the future, I mean a year from now. But I don't think that there's any real intent to try to get him on the field ahead of Steve Angeli anytime soon. So I've got to be out with the caveat. This is barring any kind of injury on Riley Leonard's part. If Leonard gets hurt, then I think that changes the whole equation. Like, how many losses do you have? How many wins do you have? Where are you in the season? And what ultimately gives you the best chance to win college football playoff games? That's going to dictate it at that point. Like for me, my answer would be CJ Carr at that point if Riley Leonard were out. But if Riley Leonard is healthy, then no, I've got to be out on CJ Carr getting quote unquote meaningful snaps this season. Because I think they're all going to continue to go to Steve Angeli at that point. From Burger 23, I don't know exactly how to say that. In or out on Riley Leonard as a Heisman Trophy finalist?
I had to double check. The finalist means 4 players. Is he going to be a top 4 player in the country? Because that's probably a mix of what, like at least 2 quarterbacks, maybe a wide receiver, maybe a running back. The fan in me wants to say in, but the realist in me wants to say out. But I don't think he needs to be a Heisman finalist for them to have, the success and sort of things that they want to have this season. So I'm just going to say out.
I'm in. I'm riding in on this. I'm pushing my chips on the Riley Leonard chain going into the season. This offense, this quarterback, the whole thing, I think that he is a highlight reel waiting to happen. So I'm going in on Riley Leonard, Heisman Trophy finalist, December 2024. Write it down right now. Come back and throw up my face if it doesn't happen.
That was me just writing it down.
Okay. All right. Back to the last question on CJ Carr. Tommy, good point, Tommy. All snaps for a true freshman are meaningful. I look at them as I suppose the word meaningful is open to interpretation. I look at them as meaningful to the team. Is that kind of how you look at it, Jess?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're on the same page. Poly 1029. Notre Dame will have 4 All-Americans this year. That's both defense and offense combined. We in or we out on that?
I'll say in.
All-Americans is so tough, man, because really all you've got to do is make at least honorable mention.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
All-American. So Xavier Watts, Riley Leonard, Benjamin Morrison. Those are my 3 top candidates. Unless, would you put Cross or Mills ahead of either one of them?
Mine would be Howard Cross, Benjamin Morrison, Riley Leonard, and I think an offensive lineman will also find a way. And then I think an X factor might be a wide receiver.
I'll go in because I think Cross and or Mills will be in there. And then, again, Morrison, Watts, Leonard. So, yeah. And, again, all you've got to do is be named to a team because, like Anthony's saying, he didn't say consensus. We're not talking about unanimous All-Americans, none of that kind of stuff. You just have to be an All-American. So, I'll go, yeah. And, Jaden Harrison, he's a preseason All-American as a kick returner. So, even though we're not thinking about him as a hugely impactful guy as a wide receiver for the offense, even though maybe he does end up being more impactful than we think. But as a kickoff returner, that's still a possibility for him to become an All-American there as well. Law Dog, racking up all kinds of questions here.
Wow.
Notre Dame defense scores a touchdown against Texas A&M. You in or out on that one, Jess?
Out.
I'm in. I think that Notre Dame gets a late score. They force Connor Wigman into a bad situation late in the game, and I do think Notre Dame's defense will score. This is somewhat random, whether or not it actually happens, but I'll go in on it right now. I wouldn't go to Vegas and bet on it, I don't think, but I will go in. Next question. Notre Dame beats A&M by double digits. Are you in or out on that?
In.
I'm in as well. I'm
looking at about 10, literally right on the dot.
Yep, that's right in my wheelhouse as well. Vince thinks it's going to be a lot more lopsided than that. I know a lot.
Of course he does.
There are other people who think it's going to be more lopsided than that. I think we need to keep track on Countdown to Kickoff of all Vince's predictions this season and just see how good or bad they end up being.
I can build us a little model.
I think that would actually be a fun game. Just keep track of Vince's predictions. Forget the rest of it.
See, we can come up with who was the furthest off on both sides, Notre Dame's score and the other team's score.
Yep. We'll call it Vince's rose-colored picks is what we'll call it. Tight ends will catch more than 5 passes in week 1. In or out on that?
Out.
Definitely out on that. Out on that. I think you'd be very, very lucky if one guy. Well, not one guy. I think you'll be very lucky if tight ends account for 5 receptions in week 1. So I've got to be out. Tosh Baker doesn't give up more than 1 sack in the first week. In or out on that?
I'm going to go out. I think Riley Leonard's ability to evade and extend the pocket will also help this. But I'll go out.
So you're actually in. You're saying that he will not
Oh,
give up
sorry,
more
yeah.
than one sack. Yeah. So I'm in on that as well. I do not think he will give up more than one sack. I think he's going to be better than most people are expecting. And as you said, because of the mobility that Riley Leonard has, he'll definitely play a factor in that as well. Speaking of Tosh Baker, from Jeff, we in or we out on Baker having a breakout season?
I mean, I think we have to go in if this team is going to excel and this offensive line is going to come together. I mean, Tosh Baker is going to play the most pivotal role in the offensive line now. And, that's ultimately, again, if you want a good unit, you want a good offense, I think all those things go together. So I'm going to say in.
I'm going to say in as well. Again, I know a lot of people are concerned because of something that happened 3 years ago and the couple of opportunities that Tosh Baker had in 2021, but I just don't think that he'd still be here with the kind of opportunity that he even has right now if he wasn't considerably better since then. That's not, again, as I've said before, that doesn't mean I think he'll be perfect and he's just going to go out there and pitch shutouts every week when it comes to, pressures and sack attempts and all that different kind of stuff. But I'm going to go in on a breakout for Mr. Baker. This one from Cousin Eddie's mobile home. One under the radar guy from both sides breaks out and provides a huge depth piece for Notre Dame. In or out on that?
I'm going to say in, and I'll give you some names. I think the easy one on offense is Jadarian Price. But I think more importantly, so this is like the whole breakout again. How do you define breakout?
Well,
right?
and how do you define breakout and how do you define under the radar? Because, again, like we talk about these guys so much, it's like, is there anyone left who's under the radar at this point? I don't know who it is right now.
You know what? Actually, I'll go Cooper Flanagan on offense.
Okay. So you're going to go with a tight end, even though you don't think the tight ends are going to do that much.
Well, I think that's naturally how it goes. I think they will progress into, a more. I think Flanagan will kind of grow into that role as the season goes on. But I really wanted to say Rocco Spindler, but he's not a guy that's under the radar. Someone that's, what I mean. But he's going to be started. Right. But he's going to be a very important depth piece amongst that offensive line, especially if people start to get hurt or. Whatever it might be, I think that even if he's not a starter, he's still going to be a valuable depth piece. And I think you could say the same probably about Josh Burnham on defense, or, maybe I'm going to go with Boubacar Traore. I think he's going to be a valuable piece and have his sort of breakout moment at some point this season.
And that's about as under the radar as you could get there. Like Anthony is saying, Jaden Thomas at wide receiver. And that's kind of where you would have to be if you're going to even name one of the receivers, because I just don't think between Faison, Greathouse, Collins, Mitchell, like, would you consider any of those guys under the radar? Jaden Harrison is probably another potential as a receiver kind of guy. Defensively, Antoine says Sneed. Again, like Sneed hasn't produced, but he's a 5-star guy who everyone's been clamoring for 2 years. So is he really under the radar? Like, where do we, how do you factor that in? DK saying KVA and Micah Gilbert. KVA is above
Dude's already
the radar.
been named basically in the starting rotation.
That's right.
Come on, DK. You're better than that.
I've got to go out just because I don't think offensively I can find anyone who
I think
really
there's too many constraints for you.
Yeah. I don't think anyone, like Jacob is saying Colsey. He's definitely an under the radar option, but the problem with that is he's under the radar because he hasn't shown he can perform. And the fact that he was running third and fourth string offense early on, I don't have a whole lot of hopes that we're going to see some big breakout season from Deion Colsey because there is so much depth and quality in that receiver room now compared to a year ago. So, I mean, he would be one of your prime candidates, but I can't go there just because I don't think that that's in the cards for him. So from Matt, Riley Leonard will have over 3,500 total yards this season. We in or we out on that?
Mm-hmm. So Sam Hartman had 2,700, and he wasn't much of a runner. I think that you can expect an uptick in passing yards from Leonard, and I think obviously you can expect an uptick in the run production as well. So for fun, I'm going to say we in. I think it's a good number. But I think let's see. Actually, you know what? Let me see Jaden Daniels' stats from last year.
Well, look, Riley Leonard had something like 3,600 yards in his healthy season at Duke in 2022.
There we go. That's a good number to go off.
So, I think that he is good for at least that number this year. So I'm in on this because again, like Mike Denbrock, bringing him into this offense, the dual threat quarterback and all this stuff, I've got to be in on Riley Leonard at least hitting what he hit a couple of years ago at Duke. Yep. Totally agree, Josh. Totally in on that. Josh Phillips, good under the radar breakout candidate. Adon Schuler, that's a really good one for defense. I think we're going to see Adon Schuler this season. So I will go with that. But again, I think it's just tougher to find the true offensive candidate. From ND Bet, he's got a couple here. The strength of the defensive line and defensive backs will free up the athletic linebackers, and the collective expertise of Freeman, Golden, and Bulla will find a way to use them to maximum effectiveness. In or out on that?
I'm going to be in on that because I mean, as a linebacker, a good defensive line ultimately frees you up and allows you to perform better. And then obviously having, good defensive backs behind you ultimately is going to help both of those. So I think this question was just kind of laid out as more of a statement. As that's just how I think that's going to naturally happen for these young linebackers. And I think that's why they have probably more comfort with playing a group of them.
And this is actually a really good point because we've talked about the linebackers and having a great set of defensive linemen in front of you and having a great secondary behind you, especially when you consider you've got an eraser like Xavier Watts sitting there on the back end as well. I think all those things can definitely help this young linebacker core and give, the triumvirate that he's talking about here between Freeman, Golden, and Bulla, it gives them confidence that they can go with their plan that they're talking about of rotating 5 linebackers with 4 of them being, more younger, inexperienced guys outside of Jack Kaiser. So I think it's a great point, and I am in on it. I like it. Hadn't really, thought of it in those terms, but I like it. He also wants to know if we're in or out on Jack Kaiser being a more athletic Danny Spond. And I don't know if you remember Danny Spond, but I think that's a pretty good comparison. Danny Spond was a pretty good athlete, but Jack Kaiser, like when you look at the fact that Jack Kaiser played quarterback and safety in high school, you just look at that athleticism right there. I think that I'm in on that. I like that. Jack Kaiser, a little bit more athletic. Danny Spond, I like that.
I do like that.
Hesburgh Mafia. This year's Heisman winner will not come from Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Ohio State, or Michigan. In or you out on that?
Michigan, no. Alabama, TBD. LSU, no. Ohio State, potentially. I don't even know, right now, who's, the top preseason Heisman candidates. I probably Dylan Gabriel. There's probably at least a running back out there. It just feels like this is the big 5, though. You could ultimately, bet on one of them. I'm just going to say I'm going to say in on this.
That it will not come from this group?
Yeah, I think Bama's got a lot going on this year with, first-time head coach. Obviously, the talent's going to be there. Georgia, I don't think so. I don't think so with LSU. Like I said, I think Ohio State is maybe your best shot at that situation.
See, I'm out on LSU. I'm out on Michigan. Those are the only two for sure. Like Ohio State, I put them, like, is the Kansas State guy really that good and all that stuff, like as good as they say? I guess we're going to find out here pretty soon. I'll go out because like the way the Heismans have gone in recent years, it's just been someone's come completely off the radar compared to where the season started. Riley Leonard is a good fit for that, kind of mold this year. So I'm not saying he's going to win it, but I did say he's going to be a finalist. But I'll go in on this. I'll say that it won't come from that group. Okay. So Joe says Brett McMurphy stated in an X post that this year's national champion, will come from the preseason top 7 ranked teams, saying except for Florida State and Auburn since 2004, all the national champions have come from the preseason top 7 ranked teams. So based on that premise, you in or out, Notre Dame is indeed in the mix to win the national championship this year.
Yeah, I'm going to say in, and I think this goes more than just off a preseason rank and, trends and all that stuff from previous years. I think Notre Dame has an excellent defense on paper. It just needs to go out and do what it's supposed to. And I think that they have the ability to have, look at how good they were last year. And I think the defense is just going to be at least on, same on par. And I think the offense is definitely going to be better. So I think ultimately that gets them, I think that gets them in the talking to win the national championship.
I agree as well. We both think they're a playoff team. They're going to be in the mix to be in the playoffs, and that's really, what it's about. There are some things that we obviously have to see from Notre Dame, but there are going to be things that we have to see from every team as well, and the narratives are going to start to shift a little bit once the season starts. But Notre Dame is a playoff team. They've got a national championship caliber defense. They've got a national championship caliber offensive coordinator and quarterback. Biggest question is going to be how exactly that line performs. We're going to find out a lot about that offensive line in week 1 at Texas A&M. But I'm in on this because they're going to be in the playoff, and we'll see just how, sort of playoff worthy in terms of what kind of run they can ultimately make after a couple of weeks of the season. But I'm in on this for right now. Balpine Shillelagh, the defense absolutely stifles Texas A&M in the opener and keeps the offense under 14 points and 215 yards. In or out on that?
I'll be in on the points potentially. I'm not going to be in on under 215 yards. I think it's a hefty task for a team that has as much talent as Texas A&M.
Yeah, I'm out because I do think A&M. I'm like the number I've kind of had in my head for a while is in the 17-point range right now. 215 yards. I don't know about that, like, just the game flow, the way things go, all these different things can happen at the end. But I'm definitely out because of this combination, because I do think A&M gets a little bit more than that. Rule 34 artist coming back saying Leonard isn't a championship quarterback. Well, who thought Joe Burrow was a championship quarterback before the season started? Who thought most of these? Whoever thought Stetson Bennett was a championship quarterback? I think that you can go down the list and find a lot of those guys. Riley Leonard is a very talented quarterback, and there are a lot of other factors that go in to being a championship quarterback beyond just who you are. One, I think he's got a great skill set, and he's a great match for Mike Denbrock's offense. But like Stetson Bennett at Georgia, he's going to have a championship caliber defense helping him out as well. And that's going to play a big part in whether or not Notre Dame is a championship caliber team. So I think, again, I'm saying I think that he's got the potential to be a Heisman Trophy finalist this season. And if you're doing that, then that's championship caliber football. So I'm still in on that, on Riley Leonard. DJ, Tennessee at Georgia game in mid-November will be for a spot in Atlanta. In or out on that?
Oh, I am not. I'm not sold on Tennessee completely.
I'm out on it for that reason as well. I'm not sold right now that Tennessee is at that level. I think that they could be potential playoff team out of the SEC, but I don't think that they are anywhere close to Georgia level right now. So I've got to be out on that too. DK, rule number 24 or 34, no excuses. Troll like a champion. We've had more of them popping in here recently. That's okay. It's all right. 3rd and 7 duo. The defense will have 4+ sacks and 2+ turnovers in the opener. In or out on that?
I'm going to say out. I think there will be – I like more of like a 3-1, 3 sacks and 1 turnover.
Yeah, Notre Dame didn't necessarily pile up the sacks last year. I think that I agree with what you're saying. I think that there will be one crucial turnover Texas A&M will commit in that game. I don't think it's just going to be like free runs at the quarterback all night. And that kind of stuff. But Notre Dame's going to be very disruptive. The offensive line is going to be one of the biggest questions that Texas A&M has going into the game, and it's kind of interesting that, for both sides, the offensive line is one of the bigger question marks, and the defensive lines are going to be two of the bigger strengths that they have as well. So I'm out as well. So we do have a few questions kind of still left hanging in there. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to the rest of them, though, tonight, because like I said, we are on a time crunch this evening because Jesse has places to go. So,
teams to see.
That is right. So, I'm trying to think of, hang on here just a second. Did you tell me that you have tickets to all 3 of the Cubs Guardians games? This this first part of this week?
All 3.
I don't think you were very happy when you came home last night, though, were you?
I was not. It was a back and forth. It was a good game, but I got home late and I was not thrilled with how that game quite ended.
All right, so like I promised, we will, like the questions, the we in, we out questions that we didn't get to tonight, we will get in tomorrow's show. So in the meantime, Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. So here's what Notre Dame quarterbacks coach Gino Guidugli says surprised him the most about Riley Leonard when he got to see him play healthy for the first time.
He's got better arm strength than I anticipated. Like when you get him in live play, that ball really comes out of his hand. And then like when you see him run and extend plays, whether that is in quarterback run or he's just scrambling in the pass, like he doesn't look fast, but like he's out there outrunning safeties and corners to the edge, and it's like, man, he's faster than you think. It's deceiving.
So Jess, what does it say that Leonard's arm strength and his speed are the things that have surprised Gino Guidugli the most so far?
I think what it says is that this offense is something that we should be ultimately even more excited about, because Riley Leonard's arm strength means that he's going to have the ability to push that ball deep down the field. Basically, when you think about it, he's Ian Book with, more size, more arm strength, and honestly what sounds like a little bit more speed, basically getting around that corner, right? And so when you're in an offense like Mike Denbrock, you need the ability. After a while, you can't just keep checking the ball down or throwing the 5-yard slant routes, flood routes over the middle, 10-yard routes. You have to be able to some point set up those deep shots with more of the intermediate kind of short stuff, right? And so I think it's a testament to how explosive this offense can be, really, because now you have the defense on its toes of, okay, are they going short? Are they going to go long? And his ability to drive that ball downfield, I think, is just going to open up more avenues for this offense. And likewise, with his legs is too. It's gonna be fun to watch him extend plays. It's to me kind of like Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes doesn't have blazing speed, but he's got enough speed to extend plays. Pick up those 3 and 4 yards on a third down where maybe the pocket collapses. Again, he's not gonna be like Lamar Jackson, right? Like he's not gonna be out there juking and pulling away from guys, but he's gonna have enough speed to extend plays. And help the offense, continue drives, essentially. I think that's essential.
And I'm sure that some of that arm strength surprise comes from the fact that when Riley Leonard was at Duke, he wasn't really asked to throw the ball deep that much. I don't know if it's maybe just like they didn't have that kind of receiver. Most of what you see when you go back and you're watching some of these old games of Riley Leonard is a lot more shorter to intermediate type stuff, kind of, maybe what you were saying there, more like Ian Book. So I'm sure that's caught him off guard. And the ball doesn't always look the prettiest, those deep balls when you see Riley Leonard throw them deep, but they are getting there. And the fact that you've got such an increased speed element in this wide receiving core and those things that you were touching on there, drive the ball deep, all these different things, that's going to look a lot different. And then the thing with the speed is like, I think what has struck most of us in the media seeing Riley Leonard up close is just how big he is, like how tall he is, and how filled out for a quarterback he is as well. He doesn't have like those shorter, choppier sort of Ian Book kind of, strides to him. He has the really long, like if you watched any of the Olympics, the difference, like when, especially like in a 200 or a 400, like the difference in these taller guys with the really long strides that they have and their ability to continue to gain ground on these shorter striders. I think that's got to be part of what pops as well. And like Gino was saying, his ability to get the corner is so much easier when you're a long strider like Riley Leonard and you have the athleticism to go with it. So just kind of piggybacking on what you were saying, I think that it's going to be such a fun added element that we're going to see offensively this season. Bringing Mike Denbrock in obviously is part of that, but having a quarterback with this skill set like Riley Leonard is just going to look a lot different than what we've got used to seeing over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately just going to be a quarterback that's a playmaker, right? And again, I'm not trying to say he's Patrick Mahomes, but that's the kind of style of play that you want him to have. He's not going to have the same arm strength, obviously, the same ability, but that's kind of going to be his style of play, I believe, is just the ability to really extend plays and have the arm strength to get those balls downfield when needed. It's not going to be an every throw type situation, but again, you have to be able to set up those all different kind of routes. You can't just be sticking to, because then defenses can sit in zones that are covering that 5 to 20 yard kind of pocket, I would say, in the defense. So you have to be able to get the defense on their toes.
So speaking of Riley Leonard, here's what the new Irish quarterback had to say about one of his new teammates, freshman quarterback CJ Carr, when he was asked if he sees any similarities in Carr compared to Leonard when he was a freshman.
Not really any similarities. He's like way above where I was as a freshman. Like honestly, like night and day.
What makes
we don't have any similarities.
Impressive.
I think his mental preparation and his will to learn, and he's just so eager to develop himself as a quarterback, and he just loves football. Like obviously he has a family that's been around football his whole life, but he just loves football. And a lot of freshmen at the time are here just coasting, trying to figure it out. Oh, at a new school, like let me go to this, go here. But he really just wants to watch film and hang out with us. So Yeah, well, there are no similarities.
Picking your brain a lot.
Yeah, he does, and I try to give him advice every once in a while, but I mean the kid really doesn't need too much advice, to be honest with you. Like, I don't know, he's pretty dialed.
Pretty dialed. Some pretty high praise from Riley Leonard for CJ Carr. What's that tell you about Carr, Jess?
I think the thing that came to mind most was he's an old soul as a freshman. He's a guy that's super mature. He talked about his ability to learn, his eagerness to learn, and he's just a football guy. He wants nothing more than to be good at football. He's not distracted by what's the extracurriculars that are going on outside of practice or just stuff that ultimately can kind of get you in trouble, right? And so if you want to be a good football player, you have to constantly be a student of game and just commit to it ultimately. So he just sounds like an old soul that's, a senior that's in a freshman's body essentially at the end of the day. And so I think that's really a good sign for, the overall quarterback development. And it's just going to push everyone else. It's going to push Minchie in the room. It's going to push Angeli in the room. It's going to push whoever, comes in and as, the quarterback next is he's going to set the standard for what it means to be a quarterback. And I think that's something really exciting to see.
I mean, I think he's going to set a new standard for what it means to be the quarterback at Notre Dame. That's TBD, but I think that is in the not too distant future. We're going to be having a lot of different conversations a year from now. But to hear, it is worth noting that Riley Leonard had a much different recruiting profile than what CJ Carr had, like coming out of high school. We talked a couple of weeks ago about how Riley Leonard basically he was planning on being a basketball player coming out of high school. And then because of, some different factors and his connection to David Cutcliffe at Duke, his high school coach's connection to David Cutcliffe at Duke, that led to a path there, but didn't take Riley Leonard long because of that athleticism to escalate up the depth chart. I think he said that by week 5, he went from scout team to starting within a week at Duke, so that obviously says something about Leonard. And so for him, again, a guy who's a year ago was getting NFL looks and is going to have a lot of NFL eyes on him this year in his final year at Notre Dame, for him to say that CJ Carr is just that more advanced, I think just says a ton about CJ Carr, because again, like we all know the lineage that Carr has with his grandpa Lloyd in Michigan and all those different things. But I think that it's just like we played a cut from Gino Gaduli about Minchie and Carr yesterday, and it just feels like everything is pointing to CJ Carr is coming. It's not if, it's when CJ Carr is coming. How quickly that rise actually happens. And it's honestly, it's pretty exciting because there's been a hype around other quarterbacks coming into Notre Dame before, but not one with this kind of polish probably since Jimmy Clausen. And because you add the whole Carr family name factor into this, I think it takes it to another level even. So a lot of fun things coming with CJ Carr in the not too distant future. So just Vince and I talked a lot yesterday about the approach Al Golden and Max Bulla will have with the linebackers this season. Here is a quick refresher from Max Bulla.
5 guys that are rotating like starters. We go 1s and 2s at practice, but we don't have 1s and 2s in our room. I got 5 guys that are playing equal. We're rotating them, and different guys start the period every day, and that's been the best thing for our room. That's been the best thing for us.
So just to kind of remind anyone who was here yesterday, or refresher for people who weren't here yesterday, the 5 guys are Jack Kaiser, Drake Bowen, Kingston Viliamo-Asa, Jalen Sneed, and Jaden Osbury. And again, like when you listen to Max Bulla, they're not just rotating 5 guys into these 3 spots. There's not a traditional first string and there's not a traditional second string. All these guys are going to play, and they're all going to play a lot. And some of, like, if this guy sees the field, depends on, okay, who else is on the field right now, that kind of thing. So, I mean, you basically started playing linebacker when you were, 7 or 8 years old and played it for 14, 15 years or whatever. So what do you think of this plan that they're going to use this season?
So obviously when you hear this, it's not traditional, right? But I think that Notre Dame has an abundance of talent at the linebacker position. And at the end of the day, you have to find a way to incorporate all that talent on the field, or one, you're doing a disservice to the player, and you're doing a disservice to the team because, look, no one as a player, I would rather, play, maybe 30-40% of the snaps compared to 0 snaps. Obviously, there's going to be guys who, amongst those linebackers are going to play more than others, but you're going to be able to utilize what they're good at, and you're going to be able to get them on the field. And so for a group that doesn't have a big gap between the players, right? Like that's ultimately what it is. The talent gap between these guys is so small that you have to be able to find a way to get them all on the field. And really what this reminds me of, like when I actually saw this online the other day, I think it was on Twitter. It reminded me, do you remember Georgia like 2-3 years ago when they just had that stud linebacker core where I think literally all of them got drafted? I mean, they did, pretty sure Pollock did, a sit down before college game day with them and just talked about, basically the same thing. There was a group of 5 to 6 of them and they all played. And he asked them, like, are you guys comfortable with that? Are you guys comfortable with, sharing reps essentially? And they said, we are going to do what's going to make our defense the most fast, the most athletic. And that year, Georgia had one of the top defenses in the country, and it obviously didn't hurt the player because they all ended up getting drafted, right? So at the end of the day, I think this is what's best for their defense, and I think it's what's going to be best for them as players as well, because you're going to get – there's just not going to be as many upset or grumpy players because they're not playing, because they all have the talent to play, right? And so if you're just trying to, stick to this traditional of 1s and 2s, well, I guarantee the 2 is going to, feel some type of way and be like, I'm just going to hit the transfer portal. I know I can play somewhere. So I think it's a good way of getting everyone involved.
Well, it's there's a lot to everything that you just said there. One, and Max Bola said it in another comment that he had when we talked to him the other day. I mean, he played linebacker, and what he said was, look, I was on the field almost all the time. So this is a lot different than that. Everyone would want to be on the field as much as possible. Do you think, based on kind of what you're saying, do you think that this is more like especially with the less experienced guys, like Jack Kaiser is one thing, these other guys are another thing, really, like especially with those other 4, do you think this is about you've got 4 guys who are really even and rip roaring and ready to go, or is it more about, okay, maybe this guy is ready to go, like Kingston Viliamu Asa, for example. He's really stood out as a pass rusher and a blitzer. We haven't got to see him necessarily as much like as a run-stopping type middle linebacker because we haven't got to see live reps and those kind of things at practice. So do you think this is more about trying to mask deficiencies or truly just play to strengths, I guess, or just a mix of both? Because it kind of seems like that's what it is.
I think, ultimately, I think it's a mix of both. I think there's not a lot of talent separating that group. And I think they're having a hard time kind of figuring out, how do you pick one or the over the other instead of just being like, okay, why not look at it as we have this group and let's kind of play them all. And then, like you said, I think naturally you're going to get into, maybe Drake Bowen is more on your rundowns and KVA is in on more, some of those passing downs, or you bring him in a 5-man blitz or something like that. I think there is obviously going to be things that one is better at than the other.
Right. And
it's finding that kind of cocktail of, okay, here's when we want to play them. But we know that even if they have enough talent to play, like they could be a standalone starter, you know what I mean? Don't get me wrong. But it's like filling in the pieces almost. It's like, to me, it's like when a baseball team goes with a bullpen day. It's like they find a way to kind of work a guy for 2 innings, 3 innings, 2 innings, 1 inning. And it's like, okay, we trust you enough to be effective for that period of time, but we know you're not going to be the most effective if we put you out there for 7-8 innings. So it's kind of how I view this.
Are you in on Jack Kaiser needs to be out there as much as possible because he's the most experienced? You still need to have
someone to set the defense. I think that's a lot to ask for like a true freshman. And again, maybe they're really good at it, but the stress of not only making your reads and playing at a high level, that's already hard as is. And so if someone with like Jack Kaiser who has the more experience of actually playing, I think he should be kind of handling the more of, okay, let's, relay the calls. Let's get set as a defense. Like, I do think that you kind of have to have one person out there that is the consistent, foundation of it. And everyone else is kind of, rotating around whatever that snap share looks like. But I do believe that you want someone like a veteran out there to be able to handle, those sort of things.
And I do believe it's fair for kind of the contrarians to sort of look at this and doubt the plan, I guess, because there is so much youth, and this is the biggest question that the defense has is the linebacker core and exactly what this is going to look like. But I find myself pretty intrigued and excited with this plan, like being able to, again, like some other stuff that Bulla talked about was, okay, when some of these guys, they'll go to Viper potentially, like in the nickel package when the Rover comes off the field and a defensive back comes on, and now you put a guy like Jalen Sneed or Viliamu Asa up there at Viper because they're even quicker twitch, and they can do one of two things. They can get downhill and get to the quarterback, or they can also defend space pretty well. So I think it's pretty exciting. And I'm also not on, like, they're doing this to try to appease people, like just to try to keep everybody happy. I don't think that's what this is about. I think that it is truly, they have a bunch of young, talented guys, and they're just trying to find a way to get that, one, that skill set on the field, but two, not put too much on any of these young guys.
And you want to overload them.
Yeah, and just play to their strengths as much as possible.
And I think naturally, too, there's going to be someone who is, ends up playing better. So it's almost like an open audition as well.
Like,
because
as the season goes on, the roles can change for sure.
Right. Yeah. And I think it becomes very situational, which is nice because now you have more pieces to kind of put the puzzle together of how, maybe this game plan calls for this, or maybe, there's going to be teams that are more run heavy. There's going to be more teams that are pass heavy. There's going to be more teams that you want to try to create pressure for. And so I think that's definitely a factor. And yeah, like I said, like these guys are all playing so well and at a high level, and it's so hard to, like, we don't want to determine ones and twos. Well, go ahead and go out there in a game. And that can be, how you're going to determine ultimately who's going to get more, I think Marcus Freeman would say this, who you can trust more out there given the situation.
Are you worried at all when you are rotating so many guys so steadily that they can get caught, like, oh man, like, trying to, like, you should have substituted or wanted to substitute?
I think that comes down to coaching. I think you have to get them to buy into the concept and their role of what they're contributing, right? Like it's like the hockey rotations where guys are coming in, specifically to kind of do their role. And I think that's what you have to make sure to get through their head is, we want you to do your role and we want you to be really good at it because that's what's ultimately going to help this team reach its next level, help this defense reach its next level. And so as long as there's just open communication and no one is surprised or caught off guard, and I think where you get into trouble is basically what Brian Kelly did when all of a sudden it was just, hey, you guys are splitting time at quarterback. And it's like, no one knew that you got, you know what I mean? It's like no one knew that they were splitting time. Not even those guys knew that was even, the possibility. So if you can communicate that up front and just be completely transparent and everyone knows their role. And so it's like, okay, like for example, Drake Bowen, you've been telling him all week, hey, you're going to start the game. KVA is going to come in at some point. And then all of a sudden now KVA is the starter come game day. Like, how is Drake Bowen supposed to feel when, he's been preparing and been told all week that one thing, and you just can't let those sort of things happen.
Right. Exactly. Fill in the blank. Notre Dame nickelback. Jordan Clark says Fighting Irish wide receiver Jaden Greathouse reminds him of Raiders receiver Davante Adams. The comparison is blank.
The comparison is freaking electric because if Jaden Greathouse can perform like Davante Adams, like this offense should just go, like he should be 1,000-yard receiver. He should have 10 touchdowns. Like this offense should be a top offense in the country if Greathouse is playing like Davante Adams. I don't think he has nearly the height. And I don't think he's, maybe as filled in as Davante Adams is. Maybe you can fact check me on their height here real quick, but to get that sort of comparison is just something that makes me as a fan even more excited and like I said, electric for the season, because we know if this offense has a wide receiver like that, and if they perform at a certain level, we know what that means in terms of how they're going to perform on the national level. And, that's ultimately what's been missing out of this offense the last few seasons is a wide receiver like Davante Adams. So it's like, you could say those things, but don't get our hopes up, because that's exactly what this offense needs.
I know. Like there's a lot of hype to, being passed around with some of these guys offensively.
They're all feeling themselves
when these comparisons come and everything. They're both 6'1" officially. So you got that. Now, is Greathouse as filled out as Davante Adams? Probably not for a college guy. He's pretty filled out, though. If anything, I do like the comparison. If anything, like probably the biggest differences to me, because I think speed and skill set were, some of the things that Jordan Clark was talking about, and the size comparison. But like Davante Adams is more savvy. Like he's the guy. He's just a veteran wide receiver who knows those soft spots, knows where to sit, knows what he needs to do to get himself to the ball. That's something that Jaden Greathouse kind of, has to show that he can do more of. And you don't expect a freshman, like he was last year, to maybe have that kind of savvy right off the bat, like unless you're a Michael Floyd or something like that, more a unicorn than anything. But I think that what Greathouse has shown, at least especially in comparison to how the Raiders have used Davante Adams the last couple of years, is Greathouse is more positionally flexible. Like you definitely see Adams more as a pure outside guy, whereas Greathouse is going to line up in the slot. He's going to line up boundary. He's going to line up field. So positionally, he can do a lot of different things and create some different mismatches and stuff like that. But I think it's a pretty fun comparison. It's one I hadn't really thought about until hearing Jordan Clark talk about it. So, Jesse, Brian Driscoll trying to find himself a new NFL team. My question to you, if you were going to ditch the Cowboys and find a new NFL team, who would you choose?
So I narrowed this down to 3 teams: the Dolphins, the Chargers, and the Lions. And I think all of them make very compelling cases. I think, first of all, you can't go for a bandwagon team, a team that's already successful.
Right.
Because at that point, what are you going to be called? A bandwagon fan, right? Obviously, you're not going to pick a team that sucks. And so you're not going to go with, like the New Orleans Saints or the Carolina Panthers or the Arizona Cardinals or, those sort of teams. Like there's nothing really exciting about them. But the things I like about the Dolphins, one, I love McDaniels. I think I would love to play for him. I think he's a great coach. I think he's very personable, very relatable. I like seeing him out there on the field, the way he talks and communicates with his players. He's a tremendous head coach. And I think what's also admirable about him is how young he is, his offensive mind. I think that's something Brian could appreciate, as, the way he has designed that offense to be around Tua and Tyreek Hill. Those are exciting things. The Chargers, and it's like, if you can remove Jim Harbaugh and everything that's happened at Michigan, like he's going to be a good coach for the Chargers. And so you combine that with Justin Herbert. They have the pieces there. And I think they are just on the brink of, getting into something good there with in terms of the Chargers.
I mean, that does make a lot of sense, because I agree with what you're saying. You can't pick a team that's especially been successful probably within even the last 20 years if you're going to jump on a new team, right? And the Chargers have only been to 1 Super Bowl all time. That was, a year before you were born. So we're going on 30 years now at this point. The Harbaugh connection would be the only drawback. But other than that,
he's still a good coach.
Brian's old school football guy and all that kind of stuff. And, they've got a quarterback. He's going to like that approach, and they're going to be successful really soon. So
they're going to be successful in the trenches.
Hadn't thought about the Chargers, but you're exactly right on that. And I like the Miami. The Dolphins is basically the Dolphins and the Lions were both teams that I thought of as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just like, how can you not root for the Lions? I hope, Derek's not in the chat because I didn't want to say that out loud. But, Dan Campbell's awesome. Seeing how he is turning that, franchise essentially around and getting them to really perform. Like, it's something you have to be excited about. And I wish I didn't have, some close friends that were Lions fans because I think I'd be rooting for them more. But I secretly am rooting for them. I like the way that they're doing things. They've really rebuilt it. They're doing it, piece by piece at a time. I think Dan Campbell is, again, another great leader of men. And it's like they're just, I think, missing a couple more pieces on defense in the secondary. And I think they have, some of those pieces at wide receiver, at quarterback. They've rebuilt the offensive line. It's just – and I think what the best part about it is Dan Campbell is going to squeeze everything out of them. There's nothing in that team that's going to be left short. He is going to get maximum – potential out of there and probably exceed your expectations at times.
I mean, I said it 2 years ago, the year before they made the playoffs. And that was the year they did Hard Knocks. They beat the Packers, knocked the Packers out of the playoffs in the last game of the regular season. It's like it's a very hard team to root against until they play your team, basically, and then they're easy to root against. But like I wasn't sure how this whole Dan Campbell thing was going to go, especially watching, some of that Hard Knocks. It's like, is this just an old school kind of nuthead kind of just football guy? There is some of that with Dan Campbell, and he likes to quote Metallica and everything else. But like, you're absolutely right. I don't think that Dan Campbell can be criticized for not getting the most out of his team. He absolutely is at least last year anyway, and I think the year before that, even when they were building up to it, he's definitely got the most out of his team the last couple of years. There's going to be a lot more expectations now. The division now is getting better as well, but it's an easy team to root for. Like if you're a free agent fan, the Detroit Lions are a very easy team to root for, I think. I mean, honestly, the only thing that might keep Brian from picking the Lions is a someone who we both know, Brian and I, who is a big Detroit Lions fan. That might be the only thing that would keep him from that. So that would be my guess. But 3 good ones. I would actually have to put the Chargers, I think, at the top of the list because it's coming with Jim Harbaugh.
That's right. And I think like you the good point you made about just like, what is there not to like there? They have a really good quarterback. They're going to be really solid in the trenches. Joe Alt just got drafted there. Mm-hmm. I mean, Notre Dame's secondary coach is now out there. Like, there's a lot of pieces that would connect
Hart's
you.
Out there. There's actually a lot of Notre Dame connections out there.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. Fill in the blank. Your least favorite NFL TV personality is blank.
Can I give you 2?
Sure. Why not?
You know who one is. Kyle Brandt is up there. And I think Dan Orlovsky is my main answer. I like Kyle Brandt. I thought you were going to come with Cal.
I thought you were going to come with Kyle Brandt for sure at the top of the list.
No, the thing that makes me frustrated about Kyle Brandt is I like Good Morning Football. I like the NFL Network. I like him, but he just can't ever give up the Cowboys stuff. And so, like, as a Cowboys fan, I get it. You're probably gonna be like, oh, he's the reality or the truth that you don't want to hear at times, and But it's like, dude, you always talk about how you are annoyed with the nauseum of the Cowboys, but you are adding to it. You always are talking about the Cowboys, so it's kind of hypocritical at the end of the day.
Yes, because I saw the rant that you tweeted, and I was watching that yesterday. It's like every year. Like his thing is, well, why am I supposed to believe the Cowboys are going to be any better this year than last year? They always get to the playoffs. They lose the playoffs. It doesn't matter. We have the same discussion every year. Well, the other side of this has just become his whole shtick is the exact spiel that he was spieling on yesterday, which is what I was just talking about. It's like all you're doing now is repeating the same thing every year, and the shtick has grown old.
Well, and it's just like
I still love him. You're right. Like
exactly.
But that particular, it's just like, okay, like you're complaining that we're not supposed to buy into the Cowboys and whatever, and all you're doing is beating the dead horse on the Cowboys. You're just basically hit and play on the same recording every year with what you're saying.
Right. And so that's where it gets frustrating. And it's just like every situation is apparently Cowboy centric, because at the end of the day, what got him going yesterday was the whole CD Lamb situation. How, this is always an issue with the Cowboys. That they say, Jerry's not going to pay the players, and they pay. Well, guess what? Contract holdouts happen with every star player on every good team. And I'm not trying to say this to be, look at me, but it's a good problem to be in when you draft guys that well and you have to find a way to give them money. It's a conundrum. And so at the end of the day, this isn't a Cowboys specific problem. In Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, like every team goes through. Why do you think there's so many franchise tags? Because they can't figure out how to get these contracts done. So this isn't a problem that is just for the Cowboys, but he finds a way to make it about the Cowboys and repeat the cycle of nauseum of talking about them, but getting tired about people talking about the Cowboys.
All right, give me your Dan Orlovsky. Dan
Orlovsky can't put any bias away. He is the most biased analyst I think he might as well just come out and say that he doesn't like this person or likes this person, because that is the root of his analysis. Like, you have to be able to, a person who is supposed to come on TV on a national level and talk about, football in general, you have to get rid of those things. And he constantly gets called out by people that he's doing these shows with, and he still will double down on, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, Just say you like him more, because that's ultimately what it boils down to.
Right. Because your ridiculous argument, you can't even back it up, because it's
the
obvious.
Most recent one was they asked him, who would you take, Mike Tomlin or Kevin Stefanski? He's like, well, Stefanski's a 2-time coach of the year. Mike Tomlin has won a Super Bowl. He goes over 500 every year.
Right.
He gets teams that are average to go to the plaplayoffs. What do you mean you're going to pick Kyle Stefanski? You know what I mean? Like, just say you like him more.
I agree. I think that he's the one who annoys me the most. Let's put it that way. Is Orlovsky. For every good point that he has, it's just like there's just too much of those tinges of the stuff that you're talking about. Like he's coming at it from an angle, It's like and it doesn't take too long to figure out the angle. It doesn't seem like.
Sorry, I went on a little soapbox there.
That's okay. At least Brandt is entertaining. As long as he's not talking about the Cowboys, he's very entertaining. Orlovsky. I actually like Orlovsky talking about college football, like when he's in the booth in college football.
So do I.
I like that Dan Orlovsky, I will have to say. But you're right. Like the NFL Live Dan Orlovsky, the talk show Dan Orlovsky, is a different guy. He knows his X's and O's in his football, but you're right. I completely agree with what you're saying. All right, well, that's going to do it for tonight. Appreciate you, Jesse, for being here. Appreciate everybody else for being here as well. As always, Vince will be in tomorrow. Jess will be in here in a couple of days. We've got another coaches player media availability later this week, so we'll have some of that. We'll hear what some of the coaches have to say later on. But in the meantime, again, hit that like button, subscribe, rate, review, all that great stuff, and we will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.